Hi there, it's Dr. Kirsten Knowles, and welcome to another episode of In the Shadows Yet Essential. So today's supporting biblical figure is Mordecai, and we meet Mordecai in the book of Esther in the Old Testament. So, fun fact, the book of Esther is actually one of two books in the Bible that does not mention God. So to understand this character, I have to give you a little bit of background, right? So this story is actually set in Persia in the time of King Xerxes. Now, many of us know King Xerxes from the movie 300, but did you know that this king is the same King Xerxes from the book of Esther? So King Xerxes was married to Queen Vashti, and one night he was having this amazing big party, and he requested Vashti to come to the party so his guests can just gawk over how beautiful she is. Well, Vashti was like, no, I'm not doing that. And that refusal caused her to be banished from the kingdom. And King Xerxes, put out a search to find a new wife. So the most beautiful women from across the regions were groomed by the palace eunuchs to be presented before the king as Vashti's replacement. One of these women was the most beautiful, and her name was Esther, or Hadassah, which was her Jewish name. Mordecai is Esther's cousin, but because she lost both of her parents at a very early age, he raised Esther as his own daughter. Okay, so now I've got you all caught up. Let's walk through the story of Mordecai. So we meet Mordecai in Esther chapter 2. Esther is being prepared for the king, and Mordecai instructs Esther to not let anyone know that she's actually a Jew. So every day, Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was progressing, with the grooming, etc. So now it was during these same daily check-ins around the king's gate that Mordecai caught what we say on the islands as gapseed or gossip about a plot. And while at the gate, he heard a conspiracy of two of the king's eunuchs who were plotting to kill him, meaning King Xerxes. So Mordecai immediately told Esther, who then told the king in the name of Mordecai. And once it was investigated and found out to be true, this event that Mordecai saved the king from demise was recorded in the book of Chronicles in the presence of the king. So Mordecai's paternal instinct to check on his daughter, Esther, positioned him to expose a plot that would lead to the demise of the king. Because of his exposing this plot, Mordecai's name was written in the book of Chronicles. And this book held historic events that would never be destroyed. And that's why to this day, we can still tell the story. So later on in the next chapter, at this same gate that Mordecai hung around, Haman, who was the king's right-hand man who was recently honored with a promotion, commanded those around the gate and the city to bow to him. Everyone bowed except for who? Mordecai. This act of defiance in Haman's eyes was deplorable. And Haman, after finding out that Mordecai was a Jew, went on a mission to destroy and annihilate every Jew. But he could not do so without the king's consent. So Haman went before King Xerxes and said, hey, there are people in your land, aka the Jews, whose ways are not like ours, and it has no benefit for them to follow your laws because they have their own set of laws. So what did the king do? He got his scribe, and the king gave Haman his ring, which allowed him, pretty much given him power, which signified that so he gave Haman the authority to carry out the elimination of the Jews and to take all of their belongings. After this decree, the Bible says that Haman and the king sat down and drank while the rest of Susa went in a complete utter chaos. Here's the first lesson we learned from Mordecai. Many of us like to be in the gate or in close proximity to those who have power and influence. But that same proximity that brought Mordecai favor when he revealed the plot of the eunuchs was the same proximity that brought potential destruction to not only himself, but the Jews. Many of us love to be in the mix of celebrities, especially in the church. But the minute you have standards and character or your position in the kingdom is exposed, you become a target. Don't envy the position at the gate if you can't take being an intercessor to protect the king and being the target of hatred for those in close proximity to the king. So the Bible says that when Mordecai got the news that of Haman's wickedness, he stripped his clothes, covered himself with ashes and sackcloth, and cried out loud and bitter at the gate. When Queen Esther heard that Mordecai was mourning outside the gate, she immediately sent him some clothes from inside the palace so he could enter the king's court. But Mordecai refused. Queen Esther sent a messenger to Mordecai to figure out why Mordecai was acting the way that he was acting. And when she found out about the whole plot that Haman was planning and his willingness to pay money to eliminate all of the Jews, she was naturally upset. Mordecai begged Esther to go before the king on behalf of the Jews, but Esther knew that going before the king without an invitation was a sure death sentence, even for the queen. So Mordecai sent a message back to Esther in chapter 4 and was like, listen, you don't forget you're a Jew. It's pretty much what he was saying. Don't think just because you are in the king's palace and that you are his wife that you will escape any more than any of the other Jews in the land. And if you stay quiet, don't worry. Another one will be raised to rescue the Jews, but you and your house, in other words, us, we're going to perish. So Esther declared a fast and told Mordecai to ensure that all the Jews joined in on this fast as Esther petitioned the favor of the king on behalf of her people. So while Esther was doing that, what she needed to do to get the king's favor, Mordecai was back at the gates. And here comes Haman, happy and joyful because he is sure his scheme against the Jews is going to work. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate and Mordecai did not acknowledge him or fear him, Haman was livid. All his riches and position meant nothing if he did not receive the acknowledgement and respect at the same level as the king. Haman went home and his wife was like, listen, you have all this power. You're friends with the king. Build a gallows and have the king hang Mordecai on the gallows in the morning. So Haman took his wife's advice. Side note, be very careful who you marry. And he had the gallows built. Meanwhile, in the palace, the king could not sleep. So he commanded the book of memorable deeds, also known as the book of Chronicles that we talked about earlier, to be read to him. And once the reading came up to the story of Mordecai and how he saved the king's life, the king said, wait 1 minute. What honor or distinction has been made to Mordecai for saving my life? And the king's servants was like, nothing has been done for him. And the king said, who is in the court? Now, Haman had just entered the outer court to speak to the king about this gallows that he built that he wanted to have Mordecai hung on, right? And the king, young men were like, oh, Haman's out there standing in the court. So the king said, oh, let him come in. So Haman came in and the king said to him, and I love this part, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? And Haman said to himself, who would the king delight to honor more than me? Y'all know people like this, right? And Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. And let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, this shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Then the king said to Haman, great idea. Hurry, take the robes and the horse. And as you've said, do so for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Leave nothing out that you have mentioned. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, this shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. And here's our second lesson. There is nothing like a God plot twist. Even though God is not mentioned once in this Bible, one thing that is undeniable is his fingerprint. What do we learn from Mordecai's story? Stay consistent. Don't be swayed, pressured, or convinced to create idols of this world or its leaders. Your enemy can plot. They can form their weapons. Not only will their weapons not prosper, but if they're not careful, those same weapons that they created can be used for their demise. Listen to me when I say this. A plot twist is coming. All right, so let's continue the story. So after Haman had to praise his nemesis Mordecai, he went home to his wife completely mortified. While he was home, his wife and friends pretty much were like, bruh, you lost this one, right? If the king, how'd you do that for Mordecai? Like, he won this war. So whilst his friend and his wife was talking to him, Esther's servants were on their way to Haman's house to invite him to the banquet that she had planned for him and the king. So Haman went with the eunuchs, and at the banquet, Esther made her request known before the king. And what was Esther's request? That her life and the life of her people be spared from the enemy who wanted to destroy them. You see, up to this point, the king did not know that Esther was a Jew because Mordecai told her not to say anything. I am sure in that moment, Haman's mouth dropped to the floor when he realized that Esther was not only a Jew, but also was Mordecai's adopted daughter. So what happened? The same gallows that he made for Mordecai was the same one that the king ordered Haman to be hung on. But not just him, his entire family. On the same day that Haman and his family were killed, Esther received Haman's house, Mordecai was given the king's ring, and Esther placed Mordecai over Haman's house. He literally took all of the spoils from his enemy. Let that sit in. And here's the last lesson I'm going to bring up about Mordecai. Esther became queen, but Mordecai helped shape her thinking, guided her response, and challenged her to act when fear could have kept her silent. One of the most important moments in this story is when Mordecai tells Esther that she may have come into the kingdom as the queen for such a time as this. Can I be your Mordecai today and tell you, you have been raised for such a time as this? Whether you are an Esther or a Mordecai in this story, know that you have a purpose. Mordecai never needed the spotlight. He just needed to have access through the gate and the heir of the queen to influence destiny. God bless you.